Okay, now I know the Pac-12 is probably the least talked about conference on this channel, and honestly, probably in all of college football, at least in terms of Power 5 conferences, right? It's probably the least watched, it's probably the least talked about, and honestly, it's probably the least cared about. I'm not trying to put the Pac-12 down here, that's just my honest opinion on it, really. I think there's several reasons for that. Number one, some really bad football out there. You haven't had really an elite or dominant team from there in a long time. You probably got to go back to the mid-2000s in Southern Cal. Oregon had some really good teams there for a while. Washington and Oregon, both good teams the last few years. Not sure they've had any great teams. Time zone, geography, right? A lot of the Pac-12 games come on really, really late for the majority of Americans because of the time zone or the time difference because of the time zones. You got a lot of Pac-12 games coming on at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even 12 o'clock at night sometimes on the East Coast, right? So not as many eyeballs see the Pac-12, I don't think, as see a lot of the other conferences. With all that being said, though, I still think there are some very interesting storylines to keep an eye on in the Pac-12 this year, and I'm going to talk about some of those right now. Hey, good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on LouTube today. So thanks for watching, I really appreciate it also. And in addition to that as well, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. And believe it or not, a lot of times they're even watchable. In fact, I think this one will be watchable for the majority of people. Give this video a thumbs up too. It doesn't cost you anything, doesn't take you any time at all, and it's a huge help to me. So if you enjoy this video, if you're a fan of a Pac-12 team, if you're excited for the start of college football season, just about 7 weeks away, slap a thumbs up on this video. I would really appreciate it. Okay, there's three sort of general storylines involving the Pac-12 this year that really interest me, and I think could have an effect on how things play out overall this college football season. And these three things are all tied together, I think, too. But I'm going to start here. The playoffs. Are the Pac-12, can the Pac-12, is there any team in the Pac-12 that is, can, or has the possibility of getting into the college football playoff in 2019? If you look at the Pac-12 and the history of the college football playoffs, it hasn't been kind. You go back to the beginning of the college football playoffs, year one, 2014. Oregon makes it. They get matched up with defending national champion Florida State in the semifinal game, and they go out and absolutely destroy Florida State. That was the highlight of the Pac-12's playoff existence in the history of the playoffs. They turned around, of course, a week later and lost to Ohio State 42-20. Oregon did. You look at 2015, no Pac-12 team represented in the playoffs. 2016, Washington finds a way to get in. They lose to Alabama in the first round in the semifinal, 24-7. So the two losses that they have, not even close games. And of course, 2017 and 2018, no representation from the Pac-12 in the college football playoff. So in the 5 years we've seen a college football playoff, we've seen the Pac-12 make it twice. They have a total of one win. The two losses that they had were both blowout losses. Can they get back there in 2019? It's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. I don't think there's a lot of room for error in the Pac-12. Whether it's fair or not, it's not really the point. College football is still subjective, not objective. As long as you got a committee making decisions at the end of the year, personal opinions, feelings, whatever are going to be involved when it comes to picking the four teams that end up making the college football playoff. You look at the schedules of some of these Pac-12 teams and just the overall perception of the Pac-12, you can forget a two-loss team getting in. I mean, you can just absolutely forget it. Now, there's a couple of conferences you could probably say that about. The ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12. I don't think a two-loss team from any of those three conferences, even Clemson, if they somehow lost 2 games, I don't think would get in. Oklahoma, if they lost 2, wouldn't get in. I don't think anybody from the ACC, Big 12 or Pac-12 with 2 losses is coming anywhere close to a college football playoff because of the perception of the overall strength or lack thereof of those 3 conferences. Obviously, I think it would be most likely in terms of 2 lost teams that you saw an SEC team get in. I also think there's a lesser possibility, although it's still a possibility, for a 2-loss Big 10 team to get in. So basically what you're looking at, if you're a fan of a Pac-12 team who has hopes or dreams of making the playoffs this year, you got to go 13-0 or 12-1, right? 12 regular season games, and then you got to win that Pac-12. You got to win that Pac-12 title game, in my opinion. Which 2 teams, or are there 2 teams, or how many teams, or what teams within the Pac-12 have a legitimate shot in 2019 of having that as an expectation or a goal? I think there's 2 teams, Washington and Oregon. I think those are clearly the best 2 shots out of the Pac-12 this year to make a college football playoff. Now, unfortunately, they're in the same division. They play each other in the regular season, so we'll see what happens there. No possibility of them playing twice like you have in the Big 12 because they're in the same division. Some people are going to say Southern Cal, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Southern Cal in a minute. When it comes to just pure talent, top to bottom on the roster, sure, Southern Cal's right there with Washington and Oregon, but, well, we'll just get to that in a second. So, anyway, topic number 1, playoffs. Any teams have a chance? Yes, I think Washington and Oregon both have a legitimate hope, anyway, of making the college football playoffs in 2019. All right, now let's talk about why I think that is, or why that might be possible. When you look at these 2 teams, Washington and Oregon, you look at their quarterbacks. Of course, Justin Herbert coming back for his 4th year, which is a surprise not only to Oregon fans, but really everyone in all of college football. Almost everybody expected this guy to go pro. Last year, he would have been a 1st-round pick. He'd probably be a New York Giant right now, would be my guess there. They probably would have taken him instead of Daniel Jones, would be my guess. But nevertheless, he decides to come back. When he made that decision to come back, that immediately made Oregon a favorite in the Pac-12, in my opinion. Now, a lot of people are really high on Washington, too. They've had really good teams over the last few years under Chris Peterson. I mentioned they made the playoffs one time. They've came up a game or 2 short several other times. They have a totally different situation at quarterback, don't they? Jacob Eason. Now, Georgia fans, this is a name obviously you know. Of course, Jacob Eason, a very highly recruited quarterback back in the class of 2016. Seems like forever ago now. Shows up at Georgia. That was Kirby Smart's 1st year. He gets to start as a true freshman. Well, he didn't start week 1. Grayson Lambert started week 1, a neutral site game against North Carolina. But Jacob Eason came in and played a bunch in that game and became the starter. I think it was week 3 or 4 of that season. Jacob Eason became the starter and played the rest of the season. How did he do? He did okay. 55% completion, 2,430 yards through the air, 16 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Now, you compare that to what you've seen Georgia do the last couple of years, and it pales in comparison. But Georgia the last couple of years is a totally different team than what they were 2016, which was Kirby Smart's 1st year as a head coach. Georgia had a lot of issues in 2016. Were some of them quarterback related? Yes, Jacob Eason didn't play great all the time. Now, when you watch Jacob Eason, you don't even have to watch him play. I mean, you can watch Jacob Eason warm up, and the talent is unbelievable. I mean, there probably aren't 5 people on planet Earth that have an arm equal to or better than what you see from Jacob Eason. He's 6'6", can make every single throw, can throw the ball 80 yards. Not very mobile. That would be, I don't know if you would consider that a knock on him, but he's just not very mobile. That would be one downside. But his potential is through the roof, sky high. Now, he hasn't played in 2 years, right? Got hurt game 1 in 2017 for UGA. Played in 2 or 3 games late in the season in meaningless snaps, really nothing meaningful. And then transferred out. Had to sit out last year due to transfer rules. Now he becomes the guy at Washington. He's got all the talent in the world. We've got to see him do it on Saturdays. I mean, obviously, I'm stating the obvious here. Any playoff hopes you have for Washington, I think, are going to be tied to the success of Jacob Eason. I like Chris Peterson. If you look what he did with Jake Browning, Jake Browning, I think his second year, I think Jake Browning had something like 45 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. Jake Browning was a good quarterback. He doesn't have the talent in his little finger that Jacob Eason, or Jacob Eason has more talent in his little finger than Jake Browning will ever have. Does that mean Jacob Eason will end up being a better quarterback than Jake Browning? No, there's a lot of question marks about Eason and his work ethic, and a lot of rumors and things like that from his time at Athens. I don't know how much, if any of that stuff is true. And if it is true, I obviously hope he's got it turned around and straightened out at Washington, but we're going to find out. But in terms of Washington making the playoffs, those hopes and dreams rest on the shoulders of Jacob Eason. I'm a huge Jacob Eason fan, just a disclaimer here. I was very high on Jacob Eason when we recruited him. I was very high on him even his freshman year. We were not a good team in 2016. A lot of that was Kirby Smart's fault. We weren't very good on the offensive or defensive line of scrimmage, particularly the offensive line of scrimmage. We weren't very good at running the ball, which seems strange if you've watched Georgia play the last couple of years, but we just weren't. Jacob Eason, in my opinion, single-handedly won a couple of games for Georgia in 2016, and it's hard really to find a game that he lost. Some people point to the Vanderbilt or Georgia Tech game in particular. He threw a really bad interception late in that game. But anyway, true freshman. I think Jacob Eason can be successful at Washington. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Jacob Eason threw 4,000 yards this year. I think he's got the talent to do it. Now, Washington, not necessarily an air-it-out team. They've run the ball a lot over the last few years. We'll see if that was more of a product of what the coaches thought of Jake Browning, or if that was just more of an overall philosophy they had in terms of running the ball. But Jacob Eason's the type of guy that can throw the ball 30, 35, 40 times a game if that's what you need him to do. I will be watching a lot of late West Coast games if they have Washington on late at night. I'm interested and curious to see how Jacob Eason does. And then you got Justin Herbert. Now here you have another guy, 6'6", can make every single throw, all-world arm, right? Can actually move around a little bit too. Like I mentioned, would have been a top pick in the NFL had he gone pro last year. All expectations are for him to have a great season again in 2019. You look at what he's done over at Oregon. In 16, he went for 1,900, 17, 1,900. Then last year, he really blew up. 3,100 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. And like I said, I think everybody expects him to improve on those numbers this year. To me, these are the two clear favorites in the Pac-12 to come out in terms of hopes of making a playoff. And I think both of these guys are going to be a big reason of why they either do or don't end up making it. Okay, Southern Cal. Now, it used to be you couldn't even start a conversation about the Pac-12 without talking about Southern Cal. Man, has that changed. What a disappointment this Clay Helton has been, right? Comes in mid-season a few years ago, I think for Sarkisian. He had to leave for some personal issues. Goes 10-3 his first year, 11-3 the next year, and then last year completely falls off the map at 5-7. And you say, well, maybe they lost a lot of players and didn't have the talent. I'll put it up on the screen and show it to you if you don't believe me. But and listen, you can cry about recruiting rankings and how they don't matter and this and that. And listen, if you want to argue that, well, here it is, okay? According to 24/7, Southern Cal had one of the 5 most talented teams in America in 2018, Florida State in this mix too. And they went 5-7. If you want to argue with me that, some of those recruits didn't pan out, it really wasn't the 5th most talented team, fine. What was it, the 10th, the 15th, the 25th, the 35th? 5-7 at Southern Cal in a terrible division. The Pac-12 South was horrible. This is unacceptable, completely unacceptable. 10 wins and 11 wins, great. But what direction is Southern Cal heading in terms of talent or recruiting? Okay, 2018, they had the best recruiting class in the Pac-12. That's amazing. Of course, we also know they won 5 games that year. But anyway, so 2018, a couple of classes ago, you had the number 1 class in the Pac-12 and the 4th best class in the entire nation. So again this year, Southern Cal will be loaded talent-wise. 2019, the class that just wrapped up this past February, right? Slipped to 3rd in the Pac-12. Who were they behind? Washington and Oregon. 20th in the nation that year. Where are they at right now for 2020 recruiting? And I know signing day, still a few months off, the December signing day, and then of course you got the late signing day in February. But where are they at right now in terms of 2020? 7th in the Pac-12. Not in the nation, 7th in the Pac-12 right now in recruiting. So recruiting is heading in the wrong direction. Performance on the field is heading in the wrong direction. It would appear to me that Clay Helton is in way over his head at Southern Cal. Like I mentioned, I put him and Willie Taggart in pretty much the same boat. I don't think either one of those guys deserve to have the job that they have, but they do. And of course, that brings me to my favorite punching bag, Urban Meyer. I still think Urban Meyer is not done coaching. I've just seen this movie before at Florida when he was on death's door and had to retire from coaching as soon as things started going south at Florida. And you fast forward 10 years and the exact same thing has happened at Ohio State. Investigations, domestic abuse allegations concerning an assistant that he knew about and didn't report properly, whatever. The point is, as soon as people start nosing around, Urban Meyer has some serious health condition. And a disclaimer, like I say every time, if for some reason he's got some serious condition, I wish him nothing but the best. But it's like the boy that cried wolf at this point. Unfortunately, I just don't believe anything Urban Meyer says. I wouldn't be shocked. I've been saying this for a year now, that I think Urban Meyer is most likely heading to Southern Cal for the 2020 season. If Clay Helton can't find a way, listen, forget 7-5, forget 8-4. Southern Cal should be winning 10+ games on average a year. Recruiting hotbed, Southern California, a terrible division. There is no excuse, no reason for a team like Southern Cal ever going 5-7. If Clay Helton can't find a way to compete for that division this year and win 10 games, Southern Cal needs to look elsewhere. I don't think anybody will be surprised if that elsewhere centers first on Urban Meyer's front door. He's, of course, working for Fox Sports this season as an analyst slash broadcaster and studio type guy. Where's Fox Sports College Sports headquartered? You guessed it, West Coast. So things are just, the stars are aligning there. But anyway, those are the three sort of general storylines, I think, that even if you're not typically interested in what goes on in the Pac-12, you can sort of keep up with those things throughout the season and it give you kind of a reason to watch. Can anybody make the playoff? Washington, Oregon. Can they go 11-1, 12-0, win the Pac-12 title game at 13-0 or 12-1 and get into the playoff? Is Jacob Eason a legitimate elite quarterback like we were led to believe coming out of high school? #1 quarterback recruit in America in 2016. I went over that in the beginning. Georgia, then got hurt, then sat out a year. Now he's the man at Washington. We'll see. Justin Herbert, is he as good as everybody thought he was last year? Did he make a mistake coming back? Like I mentioned, he would have been a first-round pick had he came out last year. Can he have a good enough season again this year to maintain that first-round draft status and maybe propel Oregon to that season that they need to make the playoffs? And what's going to happen this year with Southern Cal and Clay Helton? Are they going to continue to stumble in a terrible division, struggle for bowl eligibility, or are they going to do what they're supposed to do and win 9, 10, 11 games and make the Pac-12 South watchable? I'll be keeping an eye on those three storylines this season. If you're looking for a reason to watch the Pac-12 this year and you're not a fan really of any teams out there, I think those are three pretty good reasons to keep an eye on what goes on the West Coast this season. Appreciate you guys watching and have a great morning.